we can safely discount democracy as a reason for affecting regime change in Venezuela. We're not going to go kill Nicolas Maduro because we don't like the way he's treating his people. Of all those regime changes affected by the U.S. government, how many worked out well? To say the U.S. does not have a positive track record of regime change, I mean, that's an understatement.
Tucker Carlson just blasted U.S. regime change operations in Venezuela, a subject that's been promoted by various officials in the Trump administration and Trump himself in recent days. And in this clip, he gets into why that's not getting that much coverage, the propaganda that goes into these regime change operations. It's not because of democracy, that's for sure. And also why none of these countries ever turn out better, not only for that country, but for the United States after these regime change efforts. So let's get right into it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Not to be the bearer of bad news, but it looks like we're about to embark on another regime change war like next week. There's so much going on right now in this country that you may not be aware that there is a U.S. naval armada steaming toward Venezuela, which is a large oil-rich country in South America, not too far from here, actually. And the stated purpose of this show of military force is to force the leader of that country, Nicolas Maduro, to leave. And the threat is, unless he leaves, vacates the premises, gives up his job, turns over the reins to the opposition party, splits Venezuela for good, the United States will go to war with Venezuela, invade it even. Kind of a big deal. You may not even have known that. Very few people seem to be talking about that. Again, there's a lot else going on, but it's a pretty significant turn of events if you think about it. It's not every day the United States has another regime change war. In fact, it's been quite some time. We had a narrowly averted regime change war back in June with Iran. They were telling you the point was just to stop its nuclear program. Of course, the point was to change the leadership in Tehran. President Trump pulled back. That didn't happen, thank God. But we are on the cusp of something very similar happening not too far from here, and an awful lot could go wrong. And yes, we're fully aware that anyone who points out the potential downside possibilities of a war is not only a wuss, but unpatriotic, hysterical.
Every single time, the propaganda never changes. You're always a secret collaborator with the enemy. If you oppose the Vietnam War, you are a secret commie that sympathizes with Ho Chi Minh. If you didn't want to invade Iraq and maybe occupy it for 20 years, you were pro-Saddam. If you didn't want a 20-year occupation of Afghanistan, you were siding with bin Laden. You're a Putin apologist if you oppose funneling $200 billion to Ukraine, and on and on and on. They always use the same tired war propaganda, just as they are now, to support this regime change prospect in Venezuela, which is really indistinguishable from some of the most bellicose, wrong-headed, and frankly moronic plans of the neocons, which Trump rightly was against during his campaign seasons. He dragged Liz Cheney at the end of the last campaign. It seems like a million years in the past, but Tucker's exactly right here. You're going to be called anti-American. You're going to be called unpatriotic. It's just the neocon line, the same thing.
The fact that Caracas, Venezuela, the capital, by the way, you'll be hearing a lot more about it if we go to war there. Caracas, Venezuela, the main population center and capital of Venezuela, is about 475 miles by sea from San Juan, Puerto Rico, the American protectorate. So really from our country. It's pretty darn close, super close. And that's significant not because Venezuela's SEAL teams are going to blow up Puerto Rico, but because wars tend to precipitate huge movements of people. They cause migrant crises. They cause massive and irreversible demographic change. This has always been true, but we have a couple of pretty recent reminders. Back in 2015, with the help of the U.S. government at the urging of our closest ally in the Middle East, the Syrian civil war raged, and there were lots of players in that war, but the United States was certainly one of them. And as the result of the Syrian civil war, which most Americans were not paying attention to, Europe got invaded by migrants. You remember the migrant crisis of 2015? You may not remember because it never ended. In the 10 years since that, 1.3 million-ish asylum seekers arrived in Western Europe. Western Europe has been completely destroyed.
The same things happen in the United States, by the way, and this is a point that none of those neocons that pretend to be, very rigid anti-illegal immigration activists point out. The fact that after U.S. regime change operations in places like Guatemala and Chile and Bolivia and Nicaragua and Iraq and other places, it's produced migrancy into the United States from these countries that didn't have to have that issue if your biggest concern is to keeping immigration out. That's never brought up because they want the war more than they care about those issues. So he's right about that. No matter where you stand on immigration, what do you think will inspire or encourage or lay the groundwork or provide the incentive structure to do? Keep those people that are in beleaguered situations in, a crumbled regime there, or encourage them to come to the United States? That it's often the latter that happens.
Totally unrecognizable. That's not an overstatement. Go to Paris, go to London, go to Oslo, go to any capital in Western Europe, and it does not look Western European. And clearly, that entire part of the continent is on the dramatic downswing. There are a lot of reasons for that, but the main reason is immigration, mass migration due to war. So that's not a hysterical position. It's not crazy to worry about that, considering we're pretty close to Venezuela. So that could happen. Also, people get killed in war. Whenever you commit troops to a place, even if you bomb a place, there are after effects, there are ripples, and people die, and some of those people are apt to be your people.
Yeah, the regime's gotten away with this by just devaluing those people and not claiming that it matters, while also many of them proclaim to be, Christians or Jews that believe in thou shalt not kill, or, killing people is wrong in general. Somehow make excuses if they're from the wrong country, they're from the wrong, borders, they're in the wrong region of the world. The Israeli regime does this by calling them human shields. They happen to be human shields. We were targeting Hamas, but hey, they're human shields, collateral damage. Whatever, that's war. That's exactly how war propaganda works. They get away from that by devaluing the people involved in these killings. It's absurd. It's abhorrent, if you ask me. And you can't say you're pro-life if you just ignore this, too, by the way, if you're asking me, as someone that is pro-life. I would apply that principle universally, especially when it comes to war, too, in addition to abortion.
So if you have a war, it's fair to expect some Americans will die. And of course, we've had a lot of wars in the last 100 years, and Americans have been prepared to bear that cost. Not usually the same Americans starting the wars or cheering on the wars. They never bear that cost because they never show up at the war. People like Lindsey Graham haven't been to a lot of wars.
Isn't that the truth, man? They'll support any war imaginable, but not send themselves to the front line. We're not living in the Civil War anymore. We're not living in the American Revolution where, some of the biggest agitators for war or for, political independence to defend themselves from hostility of, rival factions or rival powers that they did actually fight in war. Thomas Paine joined the Continental Army immediately after writing Common Sense. That is what happened. You saw John Dickinson join the Pennsylvania militia. This is what real men did in the past, but now, no, they just act like the worst caricatures of warmongers that don't put themselves in that position. There's a whole great song written by heavy metal legends Black Sabbath about this. It's called War Pigs. Listen to it if you want to see what the truth is about modern war and how it plays out in America. Tucker's exactly right.
But most Americans are aware of the fact that when you have a war, people die, including some of our guys. It's sad, but we tell ourselves it's worth the cost. But it's close to inevitable. All of that is just to say, before this happens, it would be nice to know why we're doing this. Why are we having a regime change war? And by the way, unlike what happened in June, the people pushing this are just saying it right out loud. The purpose of this adventure is to replace the government of Venezuela. Now, we haven't liked the government of Venezuela for quite some time. It's been at least 10 years. They've been under pretty tough American sanctions. There have been now publicized efforts to get rid of the leader of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, and before him, his predecessor, Hugo Chavez, who claimed as he died of cancer that he was infected with cancer by the CIA. No confirmation on that. But the point is, This is a conflict of long standing. The United States, under a number of different administrations, has said out loud, we would like someone else to run that country.
Well, that's the case, and I've been actually a little surprised about how brazen this is, directly calling for regime change when that was the neocon line for so long, and you're supposed to be against the neocons. That hasn't exactly worked out when you put Marco Rubio as the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor. But Tucker's right, there is precedent for that, even in the first Trump administration, where here Trump gave Juan Guaido, the rival leader in Venezuela, challenging the legitimacy of Maduro, $52 million in the hopes that that would tip the balance and lead to a regime change there. Tulsi Gabbard actually blasted Trump for this, rightly so, in that first, when he was in power in his first administration. You hear silence from her now. She seems like either she's being silenced in terms of her influence over this regime, or she's been compromised, maybe a combination of them both, but that's just the truth. I hate to say it. I had high hopes for Tulsi. Doesn't seem like her influence is being felt if she is still a non-interventionist.
Now, it's a little strange if you think about it, that one country can just say to another country, we don't like your leadership, leave or we'll kill you. But that's what we're doing. Is that a precedent you want to set? Well, we set it long ago. But what's interesting is it's hard to think of all the regime change affected by the United States and its various agencies whose budgets you can't know and whose activities are still, decades later, shrouded in secrecy. Of all those regime changes affected by the U.S. government, how many worked out well? Would anyone say that hanging Saddam Hussein made Iraq better, made the world safer, made America more prosperous? Well, it empowered Iran, for one thing, and so on and so on and so on. So,
yeah, I mean, people don't even try to do this. In the debate between Scott Horton and Bill Kristol on, war making, U.S. foreign policy in general, and they touched on Iraq, Scott challenged him on this, and Bill Kristol did not. The consummate neocon, son of Irving Kristol, one of the original neocons, he would not even defend invading Iraq. That's where this has gotten to. There are no examples of where this worked out good for the United States. There just aren't. Not Iran, as was shown recently, not Guatemala, not Chile, not Nicaragua, not Bolivia, not Ukraine in 2014 through the Maidan coup that replaced the democratically elected Yanukovych government. None of these work out well for the United States. In Afghanistan, you took 20 years, trillions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of lives, and 4 presidents to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. That's the truth.
To say the U.S. does not have a positive track record of regime change, that the after effects upon examination haven't been worth doing, I mean, that's an understatement. It never works. But we're doing it again, apparently. So the question is why? Why are we doing this? Why are we so opposed to Nicolas Maduro? So if you ask someone on the street, random person, why are we against Nicolas Maduro? The answer you're going to get is, who's Nicolas Maduro? But if you find someone in South Florida, for example, who knows who Nicolas Maduro is, who can identify where Venezuela is on a map, that person will almost certainly say, well, because he's a communist or a socialist, he's exceedingly left-wing, and that is true. Nicolas Maduro and his government are very left-wing on economics, not on social policy, by the way, which is kind of interesting. In Venezuela, gay marriage is banned. Abortion is banned. Sex changes for transgenderism are banned. It's one of the very few countries in the entire hemisphere with those policies. It is on social policy, not defending the regime, just saying.
Yeah, this is true. And of course it's not brought up because they want war. Why would conservatives that want war bring up things that align them closer to the power that they want to displace for clearly other reasons? This is why there's a culture war, by the way, that they pitted the Tea Party against Occupy, both of which were considered threats to the regime. Actually, I think the last protest movements actually that were, because they both had some overlap, and that was the corrupt financial system in the United States. But to deal with them, they injected this culture war, trans issues, war on women, homophobia, all this nonsense that doesn't challenge the regime if people are arguing against each other, and to drive a wedge between people that would otherwise agree on, say, the wars and the corrupt financial system. This is how this works.
One of the most conservative countries in North or South or Central America. Only El Salvador really comes close, which is much smaller, of course. And by the way, the U.S.-backed opposition leader who would take Maduro's place if he were taken out is, of course, pretty eager to get gay marriage in Venezuela. So to those of you who thought this whole project was globo homo, not crazy, actually. So the average person, when asked, would say, we got to get rid of the guy because his politics are bad. His ideas are bad. We're in favor of democracy. Of course, that's why we're supporting the unelected dictator in Ukraine, because we're for democracy. That's why we had the 2020 election with the drop boxes and the fake mail-in ballots, because we're for democracy. But democracy, because we have a moral obligation to make sure that good government reigns in our hemisphere. That would be the answer. But that's not really a compelling answer. Is that really the reason? So if we see a leader in our hemisphere or anywhere in the world who's dictatorial, who, I don't know, cancels his own citizens, arrest them for saying bad things, we overthrow that person? That's not really the standard.
It sure is. And I mean, look at the monarchy of Saudi Arabia, which is one of the closest allies of the United States. We're in a starvation blockade against Yemen for them for over a decade. It's led to over 500,000 people dying. It might be 1 million by the time's over. And oh yeah, a Saudi intelligence official by the name of Omar al-Bayoumi tried to recruit 2 9/11 hijackers into the CIA by proxy as part of a program by the CIA to use this Saudi official to do it. And they don't have to pay the costs in any way imaginable. No, it isn't because of democracy. It's because of hegemony and oligarchy and empire building schemes. It always is with U.S. foreign policy now.
No. Our closest ally in Europe is the UK. And famously, last year, the UK sent 3 times as many people to jail as Russia did for saying naughty things on social media. So the UK, the government of Great Britain under Keir Starmer, is authoritarian. Obviously, it's not a democratic government. You can have a democratic government with censorship. By definition, of course.
Of course. I mean, the standard isn't democracy. It's become such a joke. It's such a meme now, right? We're supporting democracy in Ukraine by supporting the guy who's outlawed rival powers, shut down Eastern Orthodox churches, expanded conscription, shut down adversarial media outlets. No, it's not democracy. It's never for democracy, this empty-headed idea. Again, it's about hegemony and empire, and using these countries as empire-building scheme launch points. As my good friend Daniel McAdams says, war propaganda is needed to grease the wheels of the war machine, and that's just part of the propaganda.
People can't say what they believe is true. They're not free people. It's not a democracy. They don't own the country. They're under the thumb of a dictator. But there's no move to liberate long-suffering Britons from Keir Starmer. Maybe there should be, but there isn't. So I think we can safely discount democracy as a reason for affecting regime change in Venezuela. We're not going to go kill Nicolas Maduro because we don't like the way he's treating his people.
Correct.
It's possible we're mad that he doesn't allow gay marriage. That is a distinct possibility, but no one will say that out loud. So what could be the other reasons? Well, energy. That's the obvious one. Venezuela has the deepest proven oil reserves, the biggest proven oil reserves in the world. Venezuela has more oil than Saudi Arabia does. Now, it's low-grade oil, dirty oil, and its infrastructure, its oil extraction infrastructure, is in terrible shape after 10 years of sanctions and mismanagement by the government, et cetera, et cetera. Again, none of this is a defense of Maduro's economic policies, but they're not that out of whack with a lot of different places, a lot of different countries. In fact, they're not that different from the economic policies of the incoming mayor of New York, actually, to be honest. The big difference is that Nicolas Maduro is a social conservative and Mamdani is all about transing your kids. But whatever. Oil.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I don't know enough about Mamdani to opine on that specifically, but it is the case that kind of economic system would apply to many other places. And look, a lot of people are saying, well, it's just because of the U.S. sanctions regime on Venezuela that it's so backward and economically depraved. I know Rand Paul's written a book on this subject about Venezuela in particular. In 1 year, the populace dropped on average about 30 pounds because of malnourishment there. The country collapsed in a financial crisis, I believe, in 2017 or something like that. And yeah, I don't defend U.S. sanctions whatsoever. Sanctions always do hurt a populace, certainly so, but they also have a backwards, centrally planned economy, you know, of the worst kind, essentially, the kind that many people want to produce in the United States. So that's backward too. So it's a combination of both, but that's no reason to overthrow the government. That's an absurdity. Why not trade with governments that are backward? That would improve the standing of both consumers in the United States of those goods and exporters in other countries, and vice versa, exporters in the United States and consumers in Venezuela. Instead, you slap these stupid sanctions on these countries like Venezuela and Cuba and Iran that the only purpose they have is completely contrary to what the war makers suggest, that will hurt that government. No, that actually arms that government with a new propaganda device to put all the blame of their country's problems and maladies on the United States. They say, hey, it's just because of the United States that you're in the condition you are. And some of them get away with this. This is what happened in Iraq too. So that's what we're dealing with here. Sanctions is never the answer. Regime change is never the answer. It's so costly. Where did we benefit from this? Is anyone going to defend this? Will anyone defend this in the comments? Is Syria better now with an Al-Qaeda leader that deposed Assad? Is Libya better with slave trading and Gaddafi's weapons scattered throughout sub-Saharan Africa? Is Iraq better under a fundamentalist regime instead of a, treacherous but generally secular regime? Is Afghanistan better under the Taliban or under the Taliban? All of these things, it just doesn't make sense. It never makes sense, especially when we're $38 trillion in debt and Americans are facing inflation. So I think Tucker has this one right. I'm so glad he's talking about this right now. This should get way more attention, especially because it's so hypocritical when Trump was alleged to have defeated the neocons. The neocons are now out of power. And literally, this is the same neocon playbook as that which was open in June during the Iran war, that's being opened now again when it comes to regime change in Venezuela. We're sick of it. It's not America first. It is, in fact, America last. And it's time we start talking about it more. But what do you think? Let me know down below. Is Tucker Carlson right? Is this a legitimate concern? Is there any country that's benefited from regime change since, I don't know, maybe Japan? I don't think so, but let me know down below. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Tucker also. Thank you, Tucker, for making a point to talk about this. If you like this video, please consider becoming a YouTube member. You can do that by clicking the join button below. If you support my channel that way, I'll really appreciate it. And I'll give you the good deal of getting access to all of my videos before they come out to the general public on YouTube. You'll be able to watch all the members-only videos right now. Also, if you want a free copy of my book, Compact of the Republic, click the link in the description below, plug in your email, I'll email it right to you free of charge, absolutely free. It tells the story of how the United States was once a decentralized, federalistic republic where it wasn't an empire and we prospered immensely for that, but how that's been bastardized and perverted over time by war makers like the neocons and those calling for regime change in Venezuela. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.